Thank you for being with us. This is the fourth of five online conversations hosted by the Foundation for Self Leadership. I'm Toufic Hakim, privileged to be serving as the Foundation's Executive Director. This program, A Bridge Between Us, represents our warm and open invitation during these difficult times for all of us to engage in building or rebuilding bridges over troubled waters, infested with fear, anger, and hate, inequities, injustices, and inhumane judgments. The reality of a divided society, dear participants, is not particular to the US. There is chaos and confusion the world over, rooted in issues around differences of race, religion, ethnicity, gender, sexual identity, politics, and economics. And it does not have to be that way, says the idealist in me. We're much better than that. We can do better. And yes, optimists believe that in the seesaw of life, goodness often prevails. Sadly, though, not before stubborn ruthlessness and foolishness had already wreaked havoc and caused irreversible damage. Nor is the situation unique to our times. We've experienced similar struggles and crises in our world and in the US since antiquity. What we're experiencing perhaps are ramifications and repercussions that result from the absence of a good emotional injury repair, as it's called in couples therapy, at the individual, interpersonal, and collective levels. The problem looks something like this. I cause you injury, too bad. I glaze over it. And then I decide to move on, not fully owning it, not being fully aware of my part in it or how it impacts you. And I expect you to move on as well. And not only that, I continue to rub your raw wound with burning salt delivered from the tip of a sharp knife. The I here represents an individual with harsh prejudice, unchecked, passed on from one generation to the next, or a system with runaway power, arrogantly entrenched and merciless. You see, there's been no formal rapprochement, no true reconciliation, no reparation for damage done through obsessive, oppressive rather, and persisting behaviors and policies from our various societal and political systems, be they implicit or explicit. And I'm thinking here in particular about race and racism, but this apply far beyond racism. I'm specifically thinking of the plight of our indigenous people and the struggles that our Black and Asian American brothers and sisters are still facing. Just think in their case of the long historical timeline and the pain and traumas that have traveled across this timeline. There's something disconcerting about our desire to classify, compartmentalize, and label. As a scientist, I may understand it, but as a humanist, I find our impulse to oversimplify us down to a single identity and attach to it all sorts of judgments and assumptions to be not only problematic and dangerous, but more profoundly degrading, humiliating, insulting. The idealist in me wants to embrace all differences and appreciate the richness of all of them. But how can I do that when these differences are extreme and are testing and threatening my own basic values and beliefs? And how can I address external differences if I haven't yet reconciled my own internal differences, my own emotional and conflicting voices and extreme voices inside of me? You see, treating our differences, you would agree with me, dear participants, treating differences with disrespect and immunity, especially in a power differential situation, is unacceptable to the core and would cause injury that would take generations to heal. So how would we deal with that? What's the way out? Well, Donna Hicks in her book Dignity talks about integrating the other's experiences in our own viewpoints as a way toward conflict resolution and transformation. And she's not talking about a cognitive understanding of the other's experiences only, In fact, she's emphasizing our ability to feel for what happens to the other. So, how do we do that? And how do we focus on what binds us rather than what separates us? After all, we all experience pain and grief. We all desire and deserve rest and joy, as Rahul Sharma reminded us last week. How does the healing process begin? This, fellow bridge builders, is the context for today's conversation: facing and overcoming racism from other to one another. And I'm indeed very pleased to be introducing our two panelists today. Tamala Floyd is an IFS assistant trainer, an IFS certified therapist practicing in Louisiana. She brings 25 years of experience and specialty in dealing with women's and racialized traumas. She also serves as a consultant and supervisor for therapists. I was very moved and inspired by comments she made on a panel back at the 2018 IFS conference. And I'm very pleased that you could be with us, Tamala.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here, Toufic.
Good to have you.
Yeah.
And John Schwartz, who led the Center for Self-Leadership, now IFS Institute, for more than 12 years. John also led before that community and mental health agencies. He co-authored a book entitled There's a Part of Me. He led one of the earliest workshops on race and racism at the IFS conference. And John has initiated significant efforts paying off today to enhance the diversity and inclusion within the IFS community, to broaden the dialogue so that it reflects the larger societies. Tamala and John, it's lovely to have you. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Toufic. Appreciate that.
So I would like to start by adding a little bit more to my introduction by socially locating myself. So I identify as a Black cisgender female who is heterosexual. My pronouns are she, her. I grew up in a middle class family and have continued to be middle class as a result of being educated. So I just felt like locating myself socially as we have this discussion, you have just a little deeper understanding of who I am.
Thank you, Tamala. Yeah, and I guess I'll introduce myself a bit further as well. I am a white Jewish cisgender male. Was raised in an upper middle class educated background in the town of Evanston, Illinois, which perhaps interestingly is a town that is integrated yet segregated, a place where it's a lot of Black community and white community, but they don't tend to live in the same neighborhood. I'm married and have two adopted sons. One is biracial Black white, the other is Ethiopian. So I'm the father of two Black children. And I guess I'd like to maybe ground my presence here a little further and just share with you that the reasons why I was really happy to be part of this program. And first of all, it's a chance to work with Tamala, which has been wonderful. And Tamala is I call Tamala my friend. So that's been great. And it's also, this issue has always been very close to home for me, naturally as a father of two Black kids, but also for a lot of experiences in a segregated, integrated community growing up. And those experiences, many were very difficult and many resulted in my having what I would refer to as an other experience. As a Jewish person in a white community that was without much of a Jewish presence, I experienced some difficult childhood moments that somewhat at least was based on my being Jewish. And so having that experience of being in an other place, although it doesn't compare, it's apples to oranges in terms of the experience of being Black in the United States, but it still probably helped prompt me to be curious and to have a bridge to the experience that Black people have had in America. So it's really wonderful to be here. And I think next I'd like to do a little brief exercise, a brief meditation with you all. So if you just want to get yourself a little centered and take a couple of deep breaths. So as you settle in, take a good hard look, if you would, at Tamala and myself. And now I'd like you to do, once you've had that look at us, is go ahead and close your eyes. Take a couple of deep breaths and just notice what comes up for you. So as you are gathering yourself, getting yourself centered, take a moment to recall the image you have when you were looking at the screen just a moment ago of Tamala. As you review your mental picture of Tamala, what comes immediately to mind? What thoughts and feelings emerge as you see Tamala in your mind's eye? Just go ahead and take a moment to be with that. Next, just go ahead and switch over to my image. The same thing, as you review your mental picture of me, what comes immediately to mind? What thoughts, feelings emerge as you see me in your mind's eye? Okay. So when you're ready, come on back and join us. You open your eyes and come back to the program. And just take a minute to readjust, reacquaint, and reflect on the experience again of holding our images in your mind's eye for a moment. I just want to walk through a couple of thoughts and questions for you to ponder for the purpose of our time together today. Did Tamala's race show up for you as you regarded Tamala? Or did my race show up for you as you regarded me? Perhaps you thought Tamala, Black woman, or white man as you regarded me. Or did you have no racial awareness as you regarded the two of us? Or did it show up more for Tamala than it did for me, or more for me than it did for Tamala? Question I think worth pondering is it reasonable to assume that for many of us in a majority white society in the US and other majority white societies, and for many of you who are in this program, is it reasonable to assume that race appeared more in you as you regarded Tamala than it did for me? Or did it, show up more for me than it did for Tamala? But for the sake of the exercise, let's assume that it did show up more for Tamala than for me. And the question that I would like to bring us to, this larger question, is what does that mean? What does that mean for Tamala's experience as a Black woman throughout her life? And what does it mean for my experience? And how might those two experiences be very different? Just on that impulse of regarding and taking that inventory of who we are. And if Tamala's identity is more prominent in that mental inventory than it is for me, are there advantages for Tamala that aren't there for me, or are there advantages for me that aren't there for Tamala? I'd suggest that Tamala's being Black as a front and center feature of the public's awareness of her creates a vastly different experience for Tamala on an ongoing basis. And then it creates a kind of what you might call micro awareness that happens in these interactions as Tamala goes out into the world that are much different for me. And I dare say more of a burden for Tamala than it is for me. So again, as we go through the program, let's just hold on to that thought. What does that experience in the moment as we regard each other out in the world mean that it's different for Tamala than it is for me? And we'll probably come back to some of these ideas as we go forward. And with that, I'd like to hand it back over to you, Tamala.
Thank you, John. John, I really appreciate that exercise. I shared with you as we were putting this together how powerful I thought that was. So just having it here being shared, it felt very powerful. The other thing that I want to share is, John, you also talked about what brought you to this program. And in my introduction, I didn't say that. So I do want to share that with the audience. Is I was motivated to do this program because after the George Floyd murder, I was wanting to do something to make a difference, to be involved in anti-racism movement and causes, but didn't know what that was. So I was in a place of wanting to move and do something, but also being paralyzed by what was happening and not sure what that something was. So I did want to add that to my introduction so you kind of understand why I'm here. So having this opportunity to talk to you today and talk with my friend John, and John, I do consider you friend also. This is just a great opportunity for me. So what I wanted to share is a story from my life of being othered. And this experience happened late in life. I mean, it's maybe now 3-4 years ago that this occurred. And I'm a California native. I had moved to Louisiana about 15 years ago. And in my quest for friends and making new connections here, my family and I, at that time, still living in the home with my husband, and we had 3 children still at home. There's 5 altogether, that when we moved here were 5, 7, and 13. And so we joined our local Catholic church and started to meet friends there. There were a group of couples that were already friends. Some of them grew up in this little town of 10,000 folks here in Louisiana. And one of the couples had relocated from Chicago. But they kind of already had a friendship group, and we individually became friends with each of that set of couples. So there was us, a couple who is Mexican American, that was the couple from Chicago, and then 3 white couples. And, the friendship grew from just things that we were doing within the church to being friends with it, outside of church, doing activities outside of church, going, on double dates and dates with all 5 of us, going out to dinner, just really getting to know one another. And I really felt connected to the other 4 couples. One couple in particular, the woman rather of the couple would seek me out for counsel as it related to they were raising one of their grandchildren and what was going on with that. And we this couple supported me when my husband had a major heart attack. I was there for this couple when her husband was diagnosed with cancer and supporting them through that. We did things as families. We went on several retreats together. I remember one time we did this Valentine's thing with, all of the couples. I really, really enjoyed all the couples, but I'm kind of focusing on this one because of what happened with us. When in 2016, when the flood in Louisiana happened, this couple was there for us, supported us, and I truly felt like this was a friendship. This is 10 years, that we've known each other, supported each other, loved each other, expressed love to one another in words and physical hugs and being there. And my daughter, when she was, I believe, a freshman in college, she was looking for a job that would work with her going to school. And the husband said, well, hey, she can come and work for our business. And so that was wonderful. So my daughter started working there. She had all the flexibility she needed for school. And about a month to 2 months into working there, probably about 2 months into working there, she came home and shared with me hesitantly because she knew the friendship that existed with us. But she shared with me that this couple refers to their Black customers with the N word, and that they provide substandard service to their Black clientele. And she said she couldn't believe that this was happening. She approached the husband and said to him that, do you know what you're doing? This isn't okay. These are my people. I mean, I'm Black, and you're referring to other Black folks with the N word. And he said to her that he was not referring to her nor our family, that this is the way things are in the South. Remember, he said that to her. Perhaps you don't understand because you're not from here, you didn't grow up here, but I'm not referring to your family. But that continued. She even asked him if he wouldn't, and the wife also, and they had an adult son that worked at the store. So the whole family was behaving this way. And so my daughter said she no longer felt comfortable working there, and the decision was made that she would quit. And there was that in and of itself really ended the friendship. I mean, I was still today, as you see, I'm struggling for words. Still today, I feel betrayed and hurt as a result of what happened. And I felt othered in that experience because I would have never, ever thought that these were views that this couple held.
So Tamala, I'm just a little curious how, as you tell that story, as you kind of relive that story, what comes up for you, I guess?
I think what a big piece of this for me is the desire to have relationships, friendships, with white folks, and that it is genuine and everything that I thought this friendship was. And so this kind of knocked me off my center as far as, is this really possible? Can you truly, and I've had these are not the first white folks in my life as friends, but certainly the first time that this occurred. So it did undermine my belief that this is possible. And that it did definitely undermine my belief.
I just, hearing that story, it just makes me feel so sad.
Yeah.
It makes me feel sad and a bit angry too, of course. Just around the idea that after so much time building and feeling trust,
yes,
and a betrayal of that nature, that sounds like you couldn't have imagined, as you said, you couldn't have imagined that such a betrayal would happen. And having it come through your daughter, I mean, it's such a harsh story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
I've heard the story before, and it hits me raw every time. Yeah. And I feel it.
Yeah, and it was hard for me to move forward with it. At one point when we were planning this, you asked me, well, did you ever speak to them? Did they ever reach out to you? And no, in both directions. I mean, pretty much my daughter quitting the job, and she quit because she said, do I need to give a 2-week notice? And I said, no, not at all. You go in and you're done, because this is an untenable work situation. So there is no notice needed. And so they were clear, given, that she had approached the husband and the wife about the way that they were treating their Black customers. So they knew that, that clearly we were involved, my husband and I, in her leaving the job, and that we were aware of what had happened. And so that made also going to church difficult for me, because they were members, or are members, of the church I attend.
Did you keep going?
I did keep going, but I was a person on the pew, but I was not connected, because I was fuming every time I went to mass. So it was really hard to be there. So I would do things, to go to a mass differently than the mass that they went to. But it was very hard to be there.
And through it all, if I understand correctly, at no time did they reach out to you.
No.
Which is astonishing.
No.
And there was no outreach from within that community either. Say, I understand you've had a difficult experience. We're here for you. Anything like that?
You mean, well, I don't know that other people knew what happened. I personally did not even share it with the other 3 couples, because I knew that they had their own separate relationships with them. I think that this was a life situation that, like what I shared about George Floyd, for me was, again, paralyzing. It was like I couldn't, there was like, I didn't know what choice to make. So that ended up being no choice other than to end the friendship. I knew that I didn't want to continue the friendship. Yeah.
It's striking,
because I couldn't see how I could ever trust again. That friend, I mean, not other people, but
Sure. It's just on so many levels, such a horrible situation.
It was.
And it was. And I know that it still affects you. I would imagine affects your family.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
It strikes me that part of the narrative you shared, the employing of the good old, and I don't mean good old, the old, but you're not N-words, they are.
Yeah.
It's an old racist trick, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. Yeah, because it's just, and even my daughter was aware that was not, she says it doesn't matter,
Right.
that you can't refer to this group of people this way, a group that I belong to, and it be okay. And not to, and you can't say, but you're excluded. That I'm not speaking to you. Yeah, no, that doesn't work at all. And I was so proud of her, because again, she's like 18 at the time. So I was really proud of the way that she also handled it. Yeah, and it definitely opened up conversation. And not that we haven't had conversation in our family before about racism. And particularly, you shared, John, that you have a son that's biracial. My two youngest children are biracial, Black and white. And speaking to them about race has been a little different than the way that I've spoken to my other children about race. One, I think because they're the youngest, and then 2, because they present physically differently than I do, So, and they have also tended to have white friends, and currently both of them, they're young adults, both of them are in relationships with a white partner. And one of the things that this conversation brought up for us is, really finding out where your white friends stand. Don't just talk about, the things you have in common. We're going to do this thing, or, whatever it is that you have in common with your friends. Talk to them about the hard stuff. Talk to them about these things. If you guys are out and something happens, do they have your back? If the cops show up and you're Black, I don't care how light skinned you are, you're still Black. how is that going to fare for you? And it did prompt my kids to have some of those conversations with their friends and with their partners.
How did they share with you how those went? Did they come away with that feeling like their trust was well placed?
Yeah, they really did. They absolutely felt that way. It's interesting because my daughter dates a local police officer, a white guy, and just the many different conversations that they have had, I'm sure you can imagine, with, but he is someone who doesn't toe the company line. And I hate to say that, but I do live in the South, and there are officers that right now are what is it, the Louisiana state police are under investigation around police brutality issues. So, I mean, it's not just what we carry, because we're Black folks, but also dealing with what might be going on in the community at any one time. The community at large, not just the Black community, but the community at large. Yeah.
There's a question. Sorry, John, before you shift, if I may just ask a question that Vicky's sharing with us. Thank you, Vicky. She's asking Tamala if and how this may have affected your trust of befriending other white people moving forward.
Oh, good question. Good question. It has not, moving forward. It really has not. And I want to answer that question a little broader. I had the wonderful, wonderful life experience of knowing my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother was born in 1891. And I knew her until I was 25 years old at her passing. And my grandmother is born 20 something years post the 13th Amendment. So, and the end of slavery. But she had something that she would say that stuck with me, but I have lived my life trying to prove that wrong. And what my grandmother would say is, no matter how white folks show up, you can't trust them. And again, born in 1891. I mean, she a few years outside of slavery. So, and my experience has been that, first of all, my very first friend was a white little white girl from grammar school when we were, I don't know, third, fourth grade. And we were the best of friends. And her family did not hold any prejudices against Black folks. So even though I heard my grandmother say that, great grandmother, and I wasn't raised with her, but I visited her, and I knew that she held that. I for some reason really have always believed that, one, I can be friends with white people, they can be friends with me, and it really is about looking at each person individually, because they're Black folks I can't be friends with. You're not going to be friends just because we come from the same racial background. But to answer the question, absolutely. And I think I'm highly motivated to seek these friendships out. So yes, I have absolutely continued to make white friends.
The one of the things I was reflecting on with your story is, well, I'll start it off by just telling a quick story.
Yeah.
So in my over those years of being with the IFS Institute, we had an annual conference every year. Big build up, kind of a stress point in the yearly calendar for myself and our team, and for Dick Schwartz, my brother, and I'd have this experience every year of getting on, being in my hotel room at the conference, getting dressed, knowing I was going to coming down the elevator, and this moment of the elevator doors opening, and walking out into the corridor, and there'd be, you know, dozens, if not hundreds of people throughout the hallways and in the meeting rooms where the sessions were, grabbing lunch, whatever. And I'd always had this feeling like the eyes are on me. Like, oh, that's not because I'm important or anything, but just because, oh, that's that guy who I need to talk to, because there's something I need to talk to him about. You know, I could just feel it. Yeah. And honestly, since we're just sharing openly here, I mean, I just hated that feeling.
Yeah.
Like, oh God, yeah. And it would become, in the course of the 3 days of the conference, it would become kind of exhausting.
Yeah.
And again, total apples to oranges. And I don't share that story as a, oh yeah, it's tough.
Right.
It's really tough for me. But it did, I think it did allow me some awareness, back to that idea of the micro awareness, you know, as the metaphorically, the elevator doors open and I walk out into that open world, and it's a kind of micro awareness that I'm not accustomed to if I'm just walking out in the public on any normal day.
Right.
And I kind of had this awareness that maybe on a different kind of level, but on some level, as a Black person, that my assumption is that you walk into the world and there's that awareness that comes onto you too. And you and I talked about that issue of exhaustion.
Yeah.
And I shared with you that every Black person who I've spoken to about these experiences, whether it's the George Floyd story or some personal experience, an encounter with somebody, and the word that would always come up across the board was it's exhausting. It's just exhausting. And I guess I just wonder if there's something, if that word resonates for you, and what exhausting, if you could put that into words, what does that mean, being a Black woman, and how those encounters on an ongoing basis can be exhausting?
Yes, it definitely applies. It is exhausting because it's not only the big situations that show up in national news, and we've had plenty of those, but it's also the day-to-day things that we deal with, from something like a microaggression of a store person seeing you in line, but choosing to serve the white person behind you or to the side of you first, and needing to always say, you know, I was here already. Or I had a situation with my son where he was recently pulled over by the police for speeding. But then the police officer, well, my son was so afraid of what was happening that he called me on the phone and just kind of left the phone open on the seat so I can hear what was going on. But in that time period of listening to that, all of the things that we've been hearing on the news, all the Black folks that have lost their lives, because I'm listening, but not wanting to listen. I'm listening, but fearful that I'm going to hear something that was going to devastate me, my family. So we are constantly having to deal with something around race. You know, whether it's in personally, whether it's affecting other family members, whether it's affecting people we don't even know. It is exhausting because there is as I'm feeling the emotions now, there's an emotional cost to this every single day. And it's a cost that it's very hard to articulate what that feels like. And exhausting, it's like if I could think of a word more powerful than exhausting, because that almost sounds weak. You know, there's not enough, it's not a strong enough word for where this can take you. having to deal with it every, even if it's not literally every day, but truly on a regular basis. Yeah, truly.
Yeah, I mean, exhausting can be as simple as having a long day at the office.
Right. Because when I say I'm exhausted after seeing 7 clients today, that ain't nowhere near what I'm talking about. The conversation we're having right now. That those two things don't even compare.
So in this, for lack of a better word than exhausting, maybe we'll come up with one here.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Is it kind of like the combination of the rub? I'm drawn to what you said earlier in answering Vicky's question, that you have chosen not to take your grandmother's advice.
Yeah.
Which, given her context, feels
right.
like very, very
that was her experience.
Given your context, it kind of strikes me as reasonable advice.
Yeah.
But as you made a choice not to follow her advice, that means that you're kind of going forward into headwinds that you clearly are not aware of until they hit you.
Right.
Again, and they can be really small or they can be really big.
Yes.
Like the phone being on and listening. I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
I can't even wrap my head around that.
Yeah.
But is that kind of where the intersection of you choosing to go forward, but also encountering these headwinds that evoke real fear, let alone a sense of betrayal, a sense of lack of fairness, lack of justice, lack of mercy. Is that one way of looking at how that exhaustion is experienced?
Absolutely, yes. Because I've had some amazing white people in my life, I can't imagine characterizing all of them based on the groups of them that I've had negative, harmful experiences with. I know that happens to my people, but and some of racism isn't even based on having a negative interaction with any of us. But I can't imagine judging a group of people like that. Yeah, I just can't imagine it.
Right. It doesn't make sense to me either.
No.
But it is all around.
Can I jump in with a question from an attendee?
Certainly.
Actually, I'm going to try to combine 2 questions. One is about the other. Is it possible that other is a part that we develop in response to being treated as other? And is it a part we can allow to be self-led? And a corollary to that is, John, have you experienced anything, a situation where you felt like the other, like other?
Do you want to go first?
Well, the question about other being a part, I think that it can be a part. The interesting thing for me, though, is I always say I was othered, something someone put on me. I have never felt like the other. So I don't feel I have a part other, but I have been othered, placed on me. So yeah.
I love that. It's like no, we were not slaves, we were enslaved.
Enslaved, absolutely. Yes. So the othering is something that's their projection, not something that I
own. In response to the question to me about having an experience of having been othered, I'll frame it that way.
Yeah.
Yes. So I mentioned that I grew up in Evanston, and we, lived in a white neighborhood. It was an upper middle class area, but I guess paradoxically, it was, well, I shouldn't say paradoxically. It was a very unhealthy neighborhood. We moved there when I was 4 years old. And at the age of 4, the kids in the neighborhood did a war against the Schwartz family. And what that meant, was at the age of 4, I remember quite vividly looking out the window and seeing the neighborhood kids marching around our house. They were not too happy that we'd moved in. They were marching, and they literally had picket signs that said Schwartz's go home. And they were chanting, Schwartz's go home, Schwartz's go home, Schwartz's go home. And this happened several days. I remember my mother running outside with a broom in her hand, chasing those kids away. It was an othering that definitely had roots in anti-Semitism. To this day, I don't quite know why, but it was this weird thing in this highly pathological neighborhood. There's no other way for me to describe it, where there's just a lot of that tendency towards Lord of the Flies kinds of activity of, we're going to gang up on this one kid, and being new to the neighborhood and being unwanted in the neighborhood. It was very much that experience. That was one of many, many such stories that took place in that neighborhood. It was a blessed childhood in the sense that I had parents who loved each other, who loved all of us. We had our needs met, but walking out the door as a young child, and there was a lot of things that came my way that were really tough. And again, I think that played a role in why this issue, and then then later on having a number of Black friends. I more than most, if not all, other white kids we lived in different neighborhoods, but we'd converge at the same schools. And more than other white kids, I think I had a lot of Black friends, so much to the point that some of my white friends used to call me sugar-coated N-word, because in a sense, I didn't mind it, but of course it's a horrible phrase. But at the time, it's like, yeah, okay. So those are a couple of stories that I'd share that gave me that experience of being othered.
Yeah.
Part of what we, the topic of our discussion today, Tamala, is, how do we help build that bridge from other to one another, and how do we, what are the issues that come up as we work to combat racism?
Right.
One of the things we talked about is the idea of witnessing.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that.
Yeah. And I think there's, from my perspective, there's kind of a difference between witnessing and hearing. And would you care to say a few things about what witnessing looks like and why it's important for you as you encounter these headwinds of racism?
Right. Going back again to the question about, did I continue to make white friends? I'm thinking about a white friend that I've made since the situation happened with those that live here locally. And this white friend reached out to me when several of the more recent murders occurred, and said that if you need to be witnessed, if you need support, if you want to talk about what's happening, I'm here for you. She was one of the people that I shared, the first white person that I shared the situation that I shared on here that happened with my son, and really was there for me and able to, the witnessing is the holding space, the being able to be with what I'm sharing with you without making excuses for the police without, well, how fast was your son going? Did he have, I mean, and because none of that has anything to do with what was happening with him, however many miles away from me, with this police officer with this open phone line, for him to feel safe that his mom was listening in what was happening. So having her just hold that and talk to me about how difficult that must have been, the emotions you must have been experiencing, mirroring back to me some of the emotions I was experiencing. It's just really being able to hold that space. And I think not making the situation the victim's fault, because often that's what happened. What did you do? And why did they pull you over? And why did the store clerk treat you that way? Well, did you look like this? And did you, it's like, whoa, let's just stay with my experience. Yeah. And that's the witnessing. Yeah. Right. Being able to be with the other person's experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a human tendency to kind of lawyer up when we hear when we hear other people's experience.
Yeah.
And what I mean by lawyer up is our brains have a tendency to start relating it to something that I went through. Oh yeah, you went through that? I went through something like that too. I'll share a quick story that I thought of this morning. So one of my brothers, he told the story years ago that his oldest son, so they had lived for the first 5 years of my oldest nephew, his oldest son, they lived in an all-white area, and they moved to an integrated town, much like, in fact, I think it was Oak Park, Illinois, which is similar to Evanston, segregated yet integrated. So he went to kindergarten on his first day of kindergarten. First time he's been around, I think probably the first time he's been around a number of Black children. And there was a little Black girl who he felt was kind of picking on her. And she, I don't remember exactly what he complained of, but he came home and told his dad, this little girl was mean to me, and I think my brother saw that as an opportunity to try to educate his son a little bit about the struggle of racism, because he had no awareness of course he's 5 years old, but even still, he had no awareness of what it was like to be Black. Anyway, so he told him about slavery and told him about the plight of Black people for the 400 years of their American experience, and I think did his best to say, you have to understand that her experience is different from yours. So my nephew goes back to school the next day. The little 5-year-old lawyer he walked right up to this Black girl, and he said, I know that you guys went through slavery, but it's not my fault. That was his response in the moment. And the reason I thought of that story is because that's kind of what sometimes we have a tendency to do, his being a most overt case of inner lawyering up. But we have a tendency to, rather than just witness and be with it, to say, oh, well, I once had a bad, no, let's just hear your story. And let's honor your experience, which kind of brings us to another thing we've talked about, that to be helpful in these moments, that it's incumbent upon us to accept the person's story as true. It's their truth that we're
absolutely
hearing.
Yes.
It's similar, part of the same kind of thing.
Right.
Hearing your story, the person that you referred to earlier, that she was with you, and the witnessing is also a clear demonstration that she believes your story, that your story is your story, it's your truth, and it's of value.
Absolutely. And I believe, we talked about, we're also talking about moving from other to one another, is this idea of having friends from various different backgrounds, right? when I have this type of exchange with this particular white friend, it's deepening our relationship, that we can be there for each other in this way, because I've also shown up for her in this way on other issues. They're not race related, but things that are going on in her life. But when we do this, it deepens our relationship. And if it is having to do with race relationships and issues that we're going through in our life, it helps the white person, or any other person, doesn't have to be white, but someone different from me, understand my experience.
Yeah.
They totally understand my experience. I shared with one time, again, another white friend, that I hadn't heard from my son, and my son's my youngest, so that maybe that's why he gets the highlight. And then he is a Black boy, and a Black young man, and what that looks like in America today. But when I haven't heard from him in over a week, I start to get a little nervous. I start to, like, I need to call him and make sure that he's okay. She'd never heard this before, and she said, wow, that really landed on me really heavy, because I have a son, and when my son hasn't called me for a couple of weeks, I assume he's busy. I assume, he's gotten busy with work or his family, but for not to hear from your son, and what that takes you to is he safe? Is he alive? Is he okay? She said, it just really woke her up and let her, I understand another layer of your experience. So that's why it's another reason why it's important for us to have relationships with people that are different from us. I mean, it's not just understanding it textbook wise, that this person or group of people's experiences are different, but when we have it personally, these little conversations that happen and something goes on for the other person. And I've had this experience when I've talked to my Latin friends or my indigenous friends. I'm just like, wow, okay, I understand your plight and what your people have gone through, what you personally go through, on a whole nother level than I do when I saw what I saw on the news or read what I read in the newspaper.
Yeah. I mean, I think if we were looking at what we'd hope to, or what I'll speak for myself, what I'd hope to provide as takeaways from our conversation, and what you just shared, is spot on for me. I mean, I just don't think there's any. This may seem, obvious on its face, but it may be obvious, but it doesn't mean it's happening. Right. Which is that if we're not in relationship with one another, from people who have the experience of being othered in a context that we don't understand, and if we're not seeking those relationships, we're not actively looking to be engaged in relationships with people who aren't like us, and in this case, that don't share our racial experience. Right. It makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to do that witnessing, and to do and like coming back to the purpose of that meditation, perhaps. If we can have that awareness, that we have an awareness of another person of a different race, or of a Black person's experience, it profoundly deepens our compassion. Yeah, it's just an exercise in word salad if we say, yeah, it's hard for Black people, it's difficult for Black people. What does that mean? And what is and we can only know what that means if we do all we can to feel that deep compassion. Right. And we can only feel that deep compassion through relationship. So, and I'm going to quickly tell another little story of how I failed today. I had a failure today on this front. That I thought about. So my wife and I went to the gym this morning, and living in Littleton, Colorado, it's predominantly white. And in the gym, it was all, as far as I could tell, it was pretty much all white people. And I got my earbuds in, got a podcast going. I'm in my own little, bubble. And And my wife would be quick to tell you I spend too much time in that bubble. But in any case, I look over and there's a black guy, and he's walking over to another black guy, and they stop and they shake hands, and they're the kind of knowing gesture that I didn't get the impression that they knew each other well,
right? Yeah.
but there they were, and they clearly, and they were connecting with each other in large part, I'm sure, because of their shared experience of being
Right.
black.
Yeah.
And I had an opportunity right then and there to walk up, and now they might look at me like, get the hell out of here. But I had an opportunity, you have these opportunities to just be forthright and outgoing, socially outgoing. And so I guess I would say that when you have that opportunity to be socially outgoing towards people who aren't like you, take it.
Yeah.
It is for me, it is the fundamental building block of building this bridge towards one another and away from our racist tendencies.
It absolutely is. I absolutely agree with that. One other point that I wanted to bring up, because it is something that I'm hoping to be a takeaway also that we've talked about, John, is when white people are also working towards anti-racism and in support of Black people and other people of culture, we talked about this term moral fatigue, and how white folks can get, and moral fatigue isn't just affects white people, but that you can get tired and worn out and of facing this every day. And so I'm wondering, John, if you've experienced moral fatigue. If you have, what are some of the things that you've done to help with that?
Yeah, I've experienced moral fatigue. For me, I guess I would say that for me, what moral fatigue looks like is just like this morning, and that experience this morning. It's easier to stay in my bubble. That's kind of a quick glimpse into what moral fatigue looks like. And it's all around. I'm feeling it right now, Tamala. I'm feeling a change. I'm feeling a change. Last night, or a couple nights ago in the news, I noticed that for 15 minutes to open the broadcast, it was about the white woman who apparently was murdered by her boyfriend.
Oh, right.
He first 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And then at the end, they told the story of how there's been a breakdown of any kind of bipartisan Senate consideration of police reform.
Right.
To me, that's one of those feelings like moral fatigue is upon us. And moral fatigue is just, I'm tired of being asked to keep fighting the good fight.
Right.
I'm tired of being asked to stay dialed in on all of this. I've got my own life.
Right.
For me, it can show up like that, and I'm not even aware of it. It's just in the moment, like well, whatever. We all have a busy life, blah blah blah. And I think that it is. I'm glad you brought up that idea of moral fatigue, because I think Martin Luther King. I think one of my most salient quotes of his that I recall is, and this isn't verbatim, but essentially that our greatest enemy in moving forward is not the hate from the minority, but I'll use the word moral fatigue, but the what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, just the apathy of the majority. It's the apathy of the majority which serves as the greatest enemy to moving us forward, moving us through those headwinds.
Right.
And I think that another takeaway, another thing that I'd like to encourage, that I have to encourage in myself, first and foremost, and for everybody, is to think about what moral fatigue looks like in your own life, and what is the plan to not let moral fatigue descend upon you. especially at a time, and this happens over and over again in history. It's like, haven't we done enough? Can we just let it go?
Right.
And just be aware that if we all take that stance of letting it go, and the headwinds that you have so beautifully and poignantly and painfully shared today, Tamala, they don't go away.
No, they don't. They don't. And I really do believe that, just like I have to build in my life ways to manage the exhaustion of racism, you know, whether that is connecting with people that look like me, that replenish me, that uh, refresh my soul so that I can go out and be present in the world another day. I think that those of us who are experiencing moral fatigue also have to have those people and places, because sometimes it's, for me, it's being in nature helps replenish my soul. So whatever it is that we need, if this is what you're committed to, and I am committed to anti-racism, and I know that I have to be in a place where that I can continue to show up every day.
You know, there's a nice question, I guess, that could be addressed to both of you from Sharon. Thank you for the question, Sharon. How do you address issues of race with your own biracial children?
Yeah. So with my biracial children, I wanted them to know their own racial background, both the Black and the white. So that's one of the things that we talk to them about. But I also talk to them about how they are received in the world. You know, they both identify as biracial, not Black, not white, but how they're received in the world and how to be safe in a world right now, unfortunately, that they have to do this. How can you be safe in a world where there are going to be people who all the way up to want to kill you, but want to hurt you, want to discriminate against you? You know, I just talk to them about what they could possibly have to face and how to face it, because it's real. It's real, you know, and this is why my son could pick up the phone and call me. This is why we have the conversations with my daughter and her white boyfriend, who is also a police officer. I mean, it's just conversations that have to be had. So very frankly, to answer the question, I'm just very frank about what our world looks like today, in hopes that one day it'll look different, better.
How about you, John?
Yeah, you know, my oldest son is biracial, and as he was growing, I think in you know, all the phases of his growing up, as he became aware of how he was different, because he grew up in a primarily white community, and so for me, what I remember doing a lot of is just checking in with him about what his experience is with other kids, with teachers, asking him questions. Well, how does that hit you? You know, what an experience that you've had, how does it land with you? Do you think your being biracial has anything to do with that? And we would just, you know, from a very early age in grade school all the way through high school and into college, it'd be those kinds of check-in conversations. And it was interesting to see him go through various phases of attire and music taste. You have all, as I watch my son grow, as you know, for a while there he was wearing stuff that would only come from this one store in the mall that you mostly think of as white kids wearing that stuff, kind of surfer gear. And then once he got into high school, it was over to the baggy shorts, and so I would just say, you know, is part of your, and you know, then it was more into rap music and so forth, and he kind of go through these changes that without telling me, because he's forthcoming when we talk. He's not forthcoming without my prodding him. And so just sharing those stories of his own own evolution, where his identity lands.
Yeah.
Was always helpful, and ultimately he did, throughout the time of his growing up, he identified as biracial and identified as, if a choice was there, identified as Black. But and does so, I think, with pride. But it was, I always felt like the best thing I could do with him is witness, as we were talking about,
absolutely.
and ask questions, and even challenge from time to time, what it all meant for him. So it's, and it's a very rewarding experience. He's a great guy.
Maybe one more thought from each of you, since we're approaching the end of this engaging conversation.
Do you want to go first, or?
Sure, I'll go first. So my last closing thought is that I really want people on both sides of this issue to be able to be with the folks on the other side and witness and be with what is their truth. And I think the piece that I really want people to take away from this is how to take care of ourselves. I think that moral fatigue and exhaustion piece is huge. And so just how to take care of yourself as you continue with, as John was saying, the good fight, as we move forward with this, to put those things and those people, those activities in place that will help you to continue to show up and do this work. Thank you.
Beautifully said. I don't have too much to add, but I'll mention, in addition to those things, being in relationship, of being aware of the encroachment of moral fatigue within us and the people in our lives. Just the practicing the compassion in the best way that you can, to walk in the shoes of Black people. If you're white, to walk in the shoes of Black people. What is to really try to feel into that, and to recognize that there's the here and now is also built upon a history, and it's a 400-year history, of which only 50 or so years of that history have Black people even had equal rights under the law. So you've got 350 years before that of Black communities and generations, and the legacy burdens that are built upon those generations that Tamala has inherited in her life. People born at this, I don't think this is hyperbole. I don't think it's over the top. Born as victims in an active crime scene. And when we think about it that way, it's hard not to, in our better nature, it's hard not to yearn for that compassion, and to not let that compassion become exhausted.
Well, thank you both. This was indeed a very eye-opening, heart-opening conversation. It was true to your promise to make it a conversation and make it personal, and help us imagine how we go from the personal to the societal. And you left us with some great nuggets, the witnessing, the befriending, the dealing with moral fatigue, talking about micro awareness, not only of the other, but also maybe of our own experience when we have these thoughts and impulses. I very much appreciate, there's a lot to learn from this, and I know our participants have been very engaged. We thank them for being with us.